This is a letterform lecture. First, we're going to be looking at the anatomy of type. Here we are looking at a breakdown of how type is placed on a line. The baseline is the most stable axis along a line of text. The curves at the bottom of the letters, such as an A or a C, hang slightly below the baseline. Commas and semicolons also cross the baseline. If a typeface was not positioned this way, it would appear to teeter precariously, lacking a sense of physical grounding. The cap height is the height distance from the top of a capital letter to its bottom. The cap line is the top of a capital letter. Also, where the ascender reaches the top on a lowercase letter. The X height is the height of the main body of the lowercase letter, or the height of a lowercase x. The mean line is the top of the X height. Now we're going to look at the breakdown of the letter parts. And if we look at the top left corner, the arm is a horizontal hangoff of a letter form. It protrudes from the stem, and the stem is the primary vertical stroke. The terminal is a hard edge on a sans serif typeface. A stroke is the contrast and girth of a mark. On the right, if we look at the R, the shoulder is the curved stroke originating at the stem, and the tail of an R is a decorative stroke often found as a descender that dips below the baseline and is seen in the letter Q. The ascender is an upward vertical stroke that extends beyond the X height. The leg is a diagonal stroke on the K. We can see that here. The I is the center of an E, and it's specific to the E letter form. The spine is specific to the letter S. It is the center portion, the curved area of a letter S stroke. If we look at the A, the top of an A, where the letter form meets, is called the apex. It's usually on the top of a capital A. A hairline is a thin stroke, as we see here, and is usually much thinner than the corresponding strokes. The crossbar is a horizontal stroke that connects the two strokes of both an H and an A. And the fillet is this little area right here, and it's a space between the stroke and the foot of a serif. If we look down here at the G, a bowl is a circular stroke that encloses the letter G at the top form. The link is the stroke that connects the bottom of the bowl on a G. The loop is the bottom part of the G. It's an enclosed descender on the lowercase g, specific to the lowercase g. A descender is a lowercase letter that projects below the baseline. We often see this on lowercase letters like Y and G and Q. Serifs are the decorative feet that project from the stroke. Counter is the interior space of a letter form. It defines the shape of a letter. The spur is the bottom edge of a capital G. It's the stroke that protrudes on the edge. We're looking at variations of letter forms here. The alphabet is used in countless different styles, all of them variations of the basic letter forms. The most common are variations in case, face, slant, weight, and width. And if we look at the case here at the top, we can see each letter is used in two versions, an uppercase and a lowercase. The face type is generally divided into two categories, serif and sans serif. They both share the same principle of form, and we should be very familiar with that from our monogram exercise. Slant refers to the angle of type relative to the baseline. Weight refers to the thickness of a stroke relative to its height. Width refers to a letter's proportion relative to its height. Now if we look at the bottom, we can see the different types of serifs. On the left side, we have a bracketed serif. A bracketed serif has a definitive fillet. A hairline has a blunt edge and a very thin line. A slab serif has a serif that is equal to the size of the stroke. At the bottom, we're looking at something called counterform. And that is something that we're going to analyze today when we get to our counterform exercise. Counterform is the negative space inside letter forms. Often, when we say the counter, we're seeing the space on the inside. For example, in the I, in the inside portion of the E, and the counter is this black space that we see here. So let's take a look at some more counterforms. The most fundamental aspect of typographic design is the interplay between letterform background. Against its background, every letterform defines a particular counterform. Form and counterform are interdependent, reciprocal values, each integral to a letter's design. The counterform is not simply a reversal of form. It's a new entity, the part of the background that emerges through the interaction with form. And we can see this when we look at the edges of forms. For example, look at this 2. We aren't looking at the stroke itself. We are looking at the space around this 2. When combined, letterforms create new counterforms. Between them, the background now becomes the form. As the letter's original form submerges, the counterforms between letters are a rich vocabulary of new visual signs that are ultimately determined by the structure of language and grammar. Interesting graphic solutions for logo types can often be discovered through experimentation with form and counterform. And we can see that specifically with FedEx here at the bottom. They experimented with counterform, and they were able to create this arrow, which is a signifying characteristic of the FedEx logo. Also, the counterform blending in with other letter forms, as we can see in the USA network here. The form of letters. Each letter is a code that derives its meaning from a specific combination of vertical, horizontal, slanted, and curvilinear strokes. If we look back to hieroglyph and cuneiform strokes, they are combinations of all of these general shapes. The general shapes are the raw bases of a sans serif. And so if we can look at here the raw bases, we see the different types of lines, a vertical and a horizontal, a vertical and a slant, an oblique and a horizontal, a vertical and a round and a horizontal. And we can see how these turn into letter forms. The upper half is more essential to the identity and recognition of a letter than the lower half. For example, we can see an alphabet here. On the left, it's very hard to discern what these letter forms are. But if we look at the right side, right here, we can really tell what these letter forms are by seeing the top. And this is kind of looking back at counterform. By seeing the exterior of these forms, especially the top edge, we are able to see or discern more. Look at reading visual literacy here at the bottom. We can definitely understand and read visual literacy by looking at the top portion of the letters. Classification. We're looking at the basic classification of typefaces here. The top one is what we refer to as Old Style. In the 1490s, Francesco Grifo based Roman capitals on Roman forms. The typefaces derive from 15th century to 18th century designs. We see thick and thin contrast, bracketed, tapered curved serifs, and it was influenced by handwriting. The top serif is often angled. The middle one is an italic form. Italic forms were discovered after Roman forms. They were a compressed way of making typography. It allowed printers to save money. Later, it became a way of emphasizing type. Italics pronounced the diagonal slant. It was discovered in 1501, and it's based on handwriting. Transitional. Transitional is combining aspects of Old Style and modern typefaces. Slightly angular, more straight, cleaner and thin lines. In the 1700s, it was a gradual change from Old Style to the modern style. The modern typeface design was discovered in the late 1700s at the end of the 18th century. The characteristic is a vertical stress, and what we notice most is these hairline strokes, these drastic thin to thick stroke forms. Often modern typefaces are geometric. It was the real beginning of geometric typefaces. Egyptian typeface is a slab serif. A slab serif has the same weight on the stroke and the serif, and we can see that here. The stroke is the same as the serif. It was discovered in 1815, and it's often considered an antique font. Sans serif really came about in 1816. It's a typeface without a serif. William Castellan was the first one to employ a sans serif. The stroke is uniform, organic, often geometric, and vertical in stress. Stress is the general angle at which a typeface is oriented. We have left-angled stress, vertical, and right-angled stress. Here we're looking at letters, numbers, and punctuation marks. A font is a set of characters of the same size and style containing all the letters, numbers, and marks needed for typesetting. The font for Adobe Garamond includes the following types of characters: lowercase, capitals, small caps, lining figures, old style figures, fractions, ligatures, and ligatures are two letter forms that are stuck together into one letter form. They often use this to save money when doing letterpress printing. Diagraphs, accented characters, dingbats, monetary symbols. When looking at a typeface, we often talk about the diversity of a typeface. We're looking at Universe here, and Universe was designed by Adrian Frutiger in 1957. It has a simple, rigorous design, whereas many type families grow over time. Universe was conceived at the start of a total typographic system in 21 different styles, with 5 weights and 5 widths. Universe was the signature typeface within Swiss International style. The wonderful thing about this typeface is we can see the diverse range of type. For example, on the right, we see this narrow type that transitions to a medium typeface all the way to a wide typeface. So there are all these different varieties of Universe. Measurement. Around 1450, Johann Gutenberg designed movable type and made books very similar to the way we see current books, made with ink transferred to paper, published in massive volumes. Typographic measurement is seen in different ways. Picas and points are a standard of measurement used by typographers and graphic designers. 6 picas equals 1 inch, 12 points equals 1 pica, and 72 points equals 1 inch. Legibility and readability. Legibility represents the qualities and attributes inherent in typography that make type readable. These attributes make it possible for the reader to comprehend typographic forms with the least amount of difficulty. It is the clarity of which signs can be deciphered. Readability is making material attractive and inviting to the reader, pushing the envelope of the viewer's ability to decipher the message. We're looking at Paul Rand here. As you can see, he's inspecting readability. He's trying to entice the viewer by mixing up the typography. Legibility kind of falls to the wayside, especially on the right image of Type Talks. It's legible, but it takes us a moment because the T is turned on its side. A Paul Rand miscellany DQ123 can be read, but again, Paul Rand is using readability to lure the viewer in to look at this design. Today we're going to look at the importance of counterform and how counterform is a very important part of brand and identity design and how it really helps us look at the shape of individual letter forms. These are old student examples of observing counterform. We can see on the left the overlapping of type with these white forms and excluding the counters. On the bottom right side, we see that the student was looking at strokes and deleting the counters, but really integrating type, really forcing the viewer to look at the counterform or the exterior areas and interior areas of the type. These are student examples of observations of counterform using graphite and tracing paper. For this next project, we're going to be looking at all the different forms of typefaces: old style, transitional, modern, and slab serif or Egyptian. And we're going to analyze the counterform of these letter forms. And we can see the interplay of the letter forms and how they interact and how we can look at counterform. So for homework, we're going to be working on a 6x6 inch document, and we are going to be specifically looking at counterform, the outer edge of these letter forms and numeric forms. Students can use italic, they can use black text on a white template, or they can use white text on a black template, but really focusing on looking at the exterior and interior forms of the letter.